This episode of the Event Industry News podcast is sponsored by Evolution Dome, award-winning temporary inflatable event structures. Take a look at their structures at evolutiondome.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dixon, wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. And I'm looking forward to today's podcast because it's, I suppose, what you call an open conversation. Often when we record the podcasts, we've spoken to the guests in advance and we have a particular topic or an agenda or a set of questions, maybe talking points that we want to get through on the podcast. And today really is none of that and all of that, because it's a bit of a blank canvas. We're going to be talking to a guest who has not been on the podcast before, but I am genuinely excited to have the opportunity to talk to on this sort of fine Monday at the start of the week, where no doubt our guest has had to take out some time from what I'm sure we'll learn to be is a very, very busy schedule in order to talk to us. I'm delighted to say that joining the Event Industry News podcast today is Orson Francescone, who is the Managing Director of FT Live and joins the podcast today from their office in London. Orson, a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Hi, James. Hi. Hello, everyone watching, listening.
Yes, and as I said, FT Live, part of the Financial Times organization. You're at your office at the moment in London. And let's start, because we have no agenda as such today. Let's start with maybe something that may be really obvious, Orson. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your career up to now, and your current role at FT Live.
Yeah. Hi, James. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm currently the Managing Director of FT Live, which is the events division of the Financial Times. I started my career nearly 20 years ago as a content producer for a company called Euromoney Institutional Investor. And so I used to write conference programs right at the beginning of, I guess, the boom in B2B conferences and events. I mean, they had existed for many years, but the digital transition in the B2B publishing industry really provided a big boost to conferences as we know them. All of that advertising revenue that used to go into print magazines had to find a home, and it didn't automatically or naturally find a home online. And so a lot of that money kind of made its way into events, because marketeers started realizing that the ROI from event sponsorship was a lot more, I guess, traceable and visible than, I guess, on digital advertising. And so I really lived the boom in the B2B conference industry for many years, and I produced many lovely events for Euromoney. And then I moved internally within the Daily Mail Group. At the time, Euromoney was an owned subsidiary of the Daily Mail Group, and I moved into a different division called DMG Events, which is a large-scale exhibition organizer. And so I moved from conferences to exhibitions and trade shows, which are a very different beast. And there I was running some of the world's largest oil and gas events, things with 25,000, 30,000 people. I'd gone from a 200 people conference to a 25,000 people show with 800 exhibitors. So fascinating and very different business model. And then I moved to a company called Haymarket Media, which people in the UK would know quite well.
Absolutely, yes.
Historical media player, B2B media player, as head of their events. And then for the past 4 years, I've been at the FT as managing director of FT Live. So I guess my background has been into how to monetize audiences through events for publishers, I guess, primarily in B2B media. The FT is this, I define it as a weird beast of a B2C broadsheet and a B2B information provider. And it's kind of a hybrid, and that's gives us lots of advantages. Sometimes it's a disadvantage, but by and large, it's a nice place to be in the industry. And so I guess I started in content, then obviously made my way into general management. And I guess I've experienced lots of the different event models, from conferences to trade shows and exhibitions to owned events to, I guess, agency style private events. And maybe we might go into that a bit more in a second. But I guess I've been around a bit, and I've run lots of events in all sorts of industries and topics and formats around the world.
And what an interesting organization to be part of there, because as you alluded to, the Financial Times is unique in its place within the media industry and within the newspaper industry is unique in that it's a newspaper that anybody can go out and buy. and you can pick up a copy of the Financial Times, but it's unique in the sense that its audience is also very much a business audience. It's people who work in the financial industry and in the industry of economics. And so its presence as a newspaper has always been very, very unique in that respect. And thus its presence within the events industry, I'm guessing, also shares probably similarities in the unique way it not just approaches its events, but in some of the clientele it serves.
Yeah. So, as you said, we're a B2C broadsheet. You can still go out and buy the Financial Times on the newsstand. But the reality is most of our revenue comes from subscriptions. And the subscriptions are in the B2B kind of price territory. So, you're talking about £500, £600, £700 a year for a subscription to the FT, for a full subscription. And so a lot of these are still taken out by individuals, but a lot of these are also paid by companies. And we're now up to 1.5 million subscribers across the world. And so we have an unbelievably powerful brand that touches on all sorts of industry. Obviously, we define ourselves as a business newspaper, I guess.
Yeah.
But we span every industry that you can think of in every corner of the world, and that gives us, great power. From an event point of view, it's also a fantastic brand to work with. I guess a lot of my time is also spent on deciding what to do and what not to do, because with a brand like the FT, you could run an event on any topic at every corner of the world and every minute of the day, right? So the temptation is constantly to run all sorts of events on all sorts of topics, and we have a wonderful stable of 600 incredible journalists that are constantly coming to me with lots of ideas. And so actually the skill at the FT, being MD of FT Live, is also being able to pick and choose where to play and where to kind of hold back, because with such an ubiquitous brand, you could be doing all sorts of fun stuff. And I guess, there's only limited resources and time in the hour of the day.
Indeed. And the first thing that springs to mind there is, finances and economics affect every business, affect every consumer, so arguably you could say that you could put an event for every possible business sector that you can think of and every consumer sector that you can think of, and it would potentially be viable and potentially be relevant to what you do. So finding the ones that will work, because ultimately, as much as an event business is there to serve its clients and serve audiences and provide insight and information to its audiences, you're primarily there to make money. So I guess that must be a fine balancing act to decide which ones are viable from a commercial point of view.
It is. We deliver close to 30% of the group profits, so we're a very, very profitable part of the FT group. And as I said, sometimes the temptation is just to do more because the numbers can afford it. But the reality is, a finite amount of resources. We have 140 people at FT Live, primarily based in London, then New York, Hong Kong and Singapore, with some small teams there. And not only do we deliver lots of profits for the group, but we also deliver lots of engaged audiences that can then go on and become subscribers of the newspaper. And that really is our kind of the North Star of the group, is to grow a subscriber base. And so the great thing about the events is we've been able to show through some internal research, that subscribers that attend events have a higher propensity to renew their subscription, and that's kind of the dream of the B2B model, is to constantly increase your renewal rates. And event attendees that aren't subscribers to the FT have a higher propensity to subscribe post-event. You might say this all makes sense, but when we're bringing in close to 250,000 delegates per year into our events, these are online and in physical presence, these are quite big numbers that go and help our subscriber base and our renewal base. And so there's a lovely kind of, not only do we bring profits, but we also help considerably kind of drive the North Star of increasing our subscribers and increasing our renewal rates. And so it's a really kind of nice symbiotic relationship between us, our subscriber team at the FT, and obviously the amazing newsroom with the 600 journalists and the huge convening power that the brand has.
I will, and I've noted down here the word data and subscribers, and we'll get onto that shortly. But if I may, I took a few minutes prior to today's recording just to have a little look on the FT Live website, and FT Live, I think it's live.ft.com is the one that I'm on, for anybody who wants to have a little look at that website once they've listened to this podcast today. And I went on there, and in a matter of seconds, I looked on your upcoming events and filtered them just by September. Really easy, really easy process to do that. And in September alone, there are 24 events listed on your website, of which the breakdown is 9 are digital, 7 are listed as in-person and digital, so a hybrid event, and 8 are in person. So that's 9, 7, and 8. So by my reckoning, that's a fairly even split across those three genres, if we can call them, of event that we now run.
Yeah.
Is that reflective? Is that snapshot of September reflective of, you know, the wider annual operations of FT Live now in terms of the split between those three event types?
Yes, but by and large, yes, James. And so before we get onto digital and in person, we run two kind of main type of events. So we run our public facing events that are multi-sponsored. These are kind of your typical B2B conference, multi-sponsored, where people can buy a ticket to attend. So for example, the FT Banking Forum or the FT Cryptocurrency Forum. And then we have what we call a partner event model or client-tailored event model. And these are private single-sponsored kind of activations where a brand will come to us and say, we'd like to convene a particular audience around a particular topic because we want to deliver a particular message. And so this is kind of an agency style event business model. And so we're really running two business models. One is our owned event business model, and these are repeatable events that we want to grow in the long term. The other partner event model are kind of one-off activations by brand who want to convene an audience with the power of the FT brand to deliver a certain message. That part of the business is growing quite strongly. And this is something that back in the days when I started in B2B events, I remember we always used to frown upon. Every now and then we'd get a brand saying, can you do a private event for us? And we'd say, oh, no, you need to sponsor X event, or you need to come to our public events. And I guess the market has evolved and changed. And the way I like to describe our offering is really, if you think about CMOs and marketeers, they're trying to convene your audiences and deliver certain messages. And it can be top of the funnel type activation, or it can be kind of middle of the funnel or bottom of the funnel. And depending on where in the funnel you are and the message you want to deliver and the audience you want to attract, we have a different kind of offering for you. So if you want your CEO to sit next to one of the editors of the FT in front of 500 people and delivering some big piece of news, then our public events are great. But if you want to convene a smaller audience because you want to deliver a certain more of a bottom of the funnel kind of message, we can also deliver you that audience in a 5-star hotel or a Michelin-starred restaurant, all the way to a digital roundtable and webinar. So we have I would say, a relatively complex business model where we're operating lots of different types of events. I mean, the only ones we're not delivering currently are kind of trade shows. Although we have an event in Amsterdam called TNW, which is the Next Web, which is a big tech festival with 10,000 people. But other than that, we're not in the trade show business. But other than that, we're operating, webinars, conferences, roundtables, digital roundtables. And before the pandemic, I would have probably said, it's a bit too much, and it's probably a lot of work, and it adds complications because you're running lots of different things. But we see it as a strength now, and we're able to offer a menu of choices to the clients that come to us and need the FT to help deliver their message or find a solution to their problem. And we can offer a wide variety of solutions, I guess. And so that does come with complications because you need several teams and specialities, but it's been serving us quite well.
And if we reference back to something that you said at the very start of today's episode, when you were talking about your own career and going back sort of some 20 years, I had a background myself in B2B publishing. I worked for a small publishing company that published business magazines. I did that in my 20s, and I was, there. I remember going to my first trade shows was, whilst working for that publishing company, going to the NEC and finding out what a trade show and what an exhibition was for the first time. And they were vast, gigantic things. I was there, working for that business in 2008 during the financial crisis, when suddenly marketing spend was pulled. And then similarly, when in 2010 the first iPhones came along, and suddenly there was this big decline in print media and everything going out. And what that's leading me to is the statistic that you said, where currently you've got 1.5 million subscribers. 1.5 million subscribers means 1.5 million people's worth of key data job roles, job titles, businesses, interests, age, demographics, location, where they live, what they do. And data is everything nowadays, which I guess it is why the agency side of things can be so important to an organization like yours. Was the agency side of things something that had to wait until you had enough data and able to make that a viable option, or was it driven by the fact that suddenly you realized you had this data and you could then go out and offer it? Which came first?
Yeah, really good question. So it was here when I came to the FT 4 years ago. It was a lot smaller, I guess, and for a variety of reasons, it's been going quite strong. I think there's a kind of general industry trend where a lot of people want bespoke activations with private audiences, and that's just a marketing trend. And I guess we're capitalizing on that quite well. And the reality is, we have lots of subscribers, and we're able to slice and dice the data in lots of different ways. But also, where we don't have the data, the reality is the strength of the brand allows us to bring it in relatively quickly. And so, especially on our digital events, we're able to, convene global audiences. In a matter of 4 to 5 weeks, we can activate a digital event for one of our clients around a niche topic and a niche audience. And the reality is, the power of the FT brand allows us to do that. And there aren't that many brands. I mean, there are lots of brands in niches, but there are very few global brands that span sectors where we're able to do that. And so we use of course, we use our current data, but also we do go out and build data, and we're able to do that relatively quickly. And that's really thanks to the strength of the brand, to be honest.
Did the pandemic help from a digital subscription point of view, in the sense that people were forced even more than they were already to access their work via a digital means? But they weren't going into offices anymore. They weren't interacting face to face. They were doing everything via an internet connection and a laptop. I'm just wondering whether or not, actually, in your particular scenario, that actually led to an increase in subscribers, given the way that people had to work.
Yeah, good question. So our subscriptions increased considerably during the pandemic. I mean, I think in fairness, that's less to do with FT Live and more to do with the news and business cycle, right? And so during a crisis, we always see at the FT an increase in subscriptions. And so, when Trump became president, we got big bumps in subscribers. When Brexit happened, big bumps in subscribers. When the pandemic happened, big bumps in subscribers. We're the kind of brand that people turn to in a crisis, right? And so that was kind of that happened naturally. Then, of course, from an events point of view, we were unbelievably successful in transitioning to a digital model. And again, back to the brand, we were kind of, and our friends in the trade show industry suffered so much because their model is based on an in-person meetup and face-to-face meetup, and you have to visit the stand and touch the product that the people are selling on the stand. And of course, replicating that in a digital way was a complete nightmare. I mean, I really felt for my friends and colleagues, because I'd spent quite a lot of time in the trade show industry, and I love it. And I could see them trying to move digitally, and it's really, really hard. And I guess we were the right brand at the right place, because we're a content-rich brand, which in a way lends itself very well to a digital model.
Yeah.
Hardly any of our events have kind of physical exhibition stands where people are showing a particular physical product, right? And so the brand was the perfect brand at the perfect time to transition to a digital model. And so we did very well, to be honest, out of it. And it continues, our digital products continue to be very popular and successful, because if you're wanting to convene, and I'll give you an example. We have a big famous technology company that has just signed up a series of digital events with us, where they want to convene 4 audiences in 4 parts of the world around a particular niche topic in technology: Latin America, Asia, Europe, and US. And in the next 2 to 3 months, we'll be delivering those digital events. Now, if they were to do them, imagine wind back pre-pandemic, if they wanted to convene those audiences in a physical place in 4 corners of the world, well, that's probably a 12-month lead time for something like that. A conference for 200 people in Latin America, Asia, around a particular event. I mean, good luck building the data, getting people to say yes. And the dropout rates on some of these partner-free events are quite big. So you kind of need to book lots of people to make sure you have enough on the day. You got to fly people out. You got to fly the speakers, the cost of the venue. So you're talking longer lead times and bigger expense, right? And now in a matter of weeks, they're able to essentially generate huge number of leads via our digital events. And so CMOs have become quite canny. And while there's this whole debate about going back to physical, and of course physical events have been booming since the pandemic, CMOs realize if they want big numbers of leads that are engaged in a relatively short amount of space, digital is the only thing that'll give it to you.
Absolutely, yeah.
And doing it in a physical manifestation is still valuable, but it just takes a lot longer, I guess.
Well, this goes back to your point about the right clientele, the right audiences, and I use the term right audiences or the right clientele in the sense that every industry is different. There are certain industries, and I've referenced the obvious ones before on this podcast, something like the clothing or the fashion industry. The big cloth exhibitions that take place in northern Italy and in Cologne. You can the tailoring industry goes to those exhibitions so they can actually feel the cloth. So they want to, it's a tangible event. You can't do that digitally. The flip side to that is if you're talking about modern day economics and finances, it's all digital. It's cryptocurrency, it's blockchain, it's etc. It's all stuff that lives in a digital space, so can be convened quite easily within a digital space. In the examples that you've just given there, this is what we've said on the podcast before about how digital is here to last because the pandemic drove certain marketplaces down a route where they realized actually we can do this just as effectively for much less cost and just as big an impact, if not more.
Correct, and that's not really going away. I mean, the best pieces of business for us is where, and we have quite a few of these clients where a client will come in and say, listen, over the next 12 months, we've got this strategic message we need to deliver, and we need to deliver it in lots of different formats in different ways. And so they will see the advantage of an in-person event, a digital event, a private roundtable for 10 people, or a private dinner, and a big physical congress for 500 people, and they will realize that they're able to deliver that message across. If you think back to the marketing and sales funnel, top of the funnel activation, I need big numbers, so probably digital is the only way to go. Middle of the funnel, I can do that in a 5-star conference venue with 300-400 people, and my CEO is sitting next to an FT editor, and I can get lots of visibility through that. And then 2 months later, I can do a private bespoke activation at a Michelin star venue with 10 key people, right? And so you're moving those people down the funnel through the different types of events, and we have quite a few clients that kind of understand that and are able to put together a whole program of our events that spans from our big public events all the way to the private kind of partner events that we run,
which I guess is expanding their own reach. A huge word that's used in the events industry now is community. Building your communities, your event communities and your audiences, and having several different types of event that service the same sector fundamentally, but built and tailored in such a way that, like you said, maybe an in-person event is just for 20 people who've been cherry-picked to be there. Maybe your online event is for 10,000 people, but what that's doing is giving the end user, or your client in an agency perspective, the opportunity to expand their community further by running more events, rather than in the old days where they would have an annual in-person event and that was all their eggs in one basket.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, the pandemic was crazy times for everyone, right? And in a way, it was the biggest threat to the event industry, and then we will all remember that the early days of the pandemic, we thought this is going to wipe out our industry, certainly for years and maybe for good. And actually, we now all know that we've come out a lot stronger from it. Not only have even our trade show friends have got bigger numbers than pre-pandemic now. Obviously, they suffered quite a lot in the pandemic. But now the event industry is bigger than it was before the pandemic, because not only have we got the in-person events that have kind of bounced back quite strongly, but also the digital events didn't exist. And so the pandemic created a product that never existed. And so, and in a weird way, it did exist. There was a thing called webinars, which nobody used to do because they were really naff and nobody liked them. I was like, why would you do that? But suddenly, we have new digital products that never existed. And so, incredibly, the pandemic has helped the events industry grow bigger and faster than it would have without the pandemic. And who would have ever thought that, right?
Indeed. And I mentioned about 12 months ago, I think I mentioned on this podcast that the word webinar seemed to have disappeared from our vocabulary. It was a word that cropped up occasionally pre-pandemic, and a webinar, and it always seemed to be a bit of a ridiculous term,
Terribly naff, wasn't it?
terribly naff term, a webinar.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, what we were trying to promote as webinars pre-pandemic suddenly became digital events.
Yeah.
And digital event platforms. And just I guess sometimes all
Well,
you've got to do is
we're
reframe.
doing it now, right? We're doing a digital event now, and I can see the platform you're using is StreamYard, and obviously we've seen so much happening in the event tech world. There's another industry was born that never existed before, was the event tech industry. Now we all know that it's gone through lots of ups and downs, but that's a new industry that's brought new money into the events industry, employment, jobs, skill set. I have a whole team now of people that are experts at digital events that never had to do that really, and so they're more broadcasting ready than, say, kind of physical event ready.
And you've actually preempted what I was sort of leading up to, which is to ask about the restructuring of your own business with the digital space. And again, this is something that we've spoken about on the podcast many times in the last 18 months, 2 years, is that, the companies that have done hybrid or digital events really, really well are the ones that recognize that this is a new strand, a new element of their operation, and to treat it the same with the same team of people as the ones that deliver your in-person events is foolish, given the opportunities that we've already alluded to in this discussion today. How much sort of restructuring or repositioning of staff did you have to do, and in what sort of time frame, in order to really deliver the digital element that you can now do now?
Yeah. So, I mean, during the pandemic, obviously, we had a crazy pivot and transition. And so essentially people overnight had to learn a new job, in particular, our operations team. And some of them loved it and some of them couldn't cope with it because, essentially you're asking someone from running a live event to become a TV broadcaster in a matter of weeks. And so it was really difficult and tough for many people. But essentially most of our team now, but now we're, as time has gone by, teams are specialized into the types of deliveries. I mean, I would say that most of our operations team can run both events, so physical and digital. There are some people that essentially full-time look after our digital event technology or broadcast quality. I was just talking to our head of operations yesterday, and they've just bought a new vision mixing desk, which I find fascinating. I mean, this is something we would never have used pre-pandemic, right? And so suddenly we've got vision mixing desks. We have a beautiful studio in the basement here at Bracken House in London that we use a lot. We've built a mini studio here on the events floor that didn't exist before. And so we have a whole team that essentially dedicated to digital transmission and live broadcasting, which is a skill in its own set, right? I mean,
Yeah, and regardless of the scale of the operation, I think many people, if not all people listening to this today that worked in events in some capacity will have experienced that. I experienced it. I'm on the production team for Event Tech Live, which is part of the Event Industry News family. And in that pandemic, I sat in front of a camera for 5 days straight to do a virtual edition of the event. And like you said, we had to learn how to set up the office as a TV studio, almost overnight. What can we get hold of? Not only, in a short space of time and learn something new, but when supplies and equipment was limited, you had to get hold of what you had available to you and make it work. And the learning curve that put us through, I think ultimately will serve us really, really well, because we learned so much in such a short space of time that when we did come out of the pandemic, I think for the most part we were very, very clued up and tooled up in what to do once we were given the scenario where we had better access to better equipment and better services and better facilities.
I agree. I mean, I think of all the industries that were impacted by the pandemic, and basically, all of them were. Ours was up there with airlines in being the most disrupted. Like, live events and airlines. I mean, forget it. You can't run live events. But we were probably, of all the industries, the ones that were able to adapt and morph and really use human ingenuity and sometimes the fear of kind of your, losing your livelihood and your job really made you think there's got to be a different way. And pretty incredible case studies. I suspect in 20 years' time, business schools will look back at the event industry as one of the most resilient, I guess. And it's probably, as we know, these are cliches, but they're true. People who work in events are used to all sorts of adversities and things happening and being able to deal quickly with crises, right? And I think that set us up really well in terms of mindset.
Yeah.
We've all run live events where things have gone terribly and you've had to do stuff really quickly, right? And I think having that mindset of being able to react really quickly put us in front of lots of other industries that were just caught like kind of rabbit in the headlights, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's incredible. We did incredibly well at moving really quickly, and kudos to everyone, really. And that has really put us in good stead. And now, we all look at the event industry numbers. We're bigger. The whole industry is bigger and better and more profitable than it was before.
You mentioned something a few minutes ago, Orson, about event tech companies and the boom in that particular sector, which, as you said, has gone up and it's gone down. And working on a trade show that services that industry, I know sort of firsthand, just by looking at the exhibitors over the 10 years that I've been involved with Event Tech Live, and the changing company names, the companies who were there 10 years ago who aren't there now, the ones who've sprung up, the ones who've disappeared, the ones who've really made an impact. And that brings me to a question about platforms, because again, looking at the FT Live website and looking at the events that you run, you can easily within a few clicks see some of the scheduling, the programming of some of the events and what's available. And that, I would guess, has all been driven by an event platform of some description. How many different suppliers have you kind of gone through in order to find ones that work for you? Because again, referencing the pandemic, we were faced with a scenario where very quickly we had to make decisions. I know a lot of organizers who chose a platform very, very quickly, but then changed it very, very quickly. Very few organizers that I know have stuck with the same platform that they initially went within the pandemic, because they slowly evolved and realized that some were better than others for their own purposes. What was the story like for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll never forget more or less the months between May and August of 2020. Essentially, I must have been in hundreds of meetings with platform providers and technology and hundreds of technology meetings and essentially trying to figure out how we were going to build this digital events business. It's a fascinating time, unbelievably intense. And, I must have met every event entrepreneur under the sun, and I became very good friends with some of them. I mean, Johnny at Hopin is a dear friend of mine, and so is Iran at Bizzabo. They are both great friends of mine, and they've both been through lots of ups and downs. And in fact, I wish Johnny lots of luck and well in his next venture. Whatever he does, I'm sure will be another incredible success. But obviously, what a story there.
Yes.
We by and large stuck with our provider, which at the time was Bizzabo and our friend Iran and our friends in Israel and New York, and it served us very well. Not without its complications and complexities, but essentially it served us very well for a variety of reasons. I mean, I can go into lots of the detail if you like, but essentially, we dabbled with a few other pieces of technology, and we kind of adopted a real agile mindset in terms of testing and trying and pivoting, as and when we needed. And so, but by and large, we stuck with, we now have essentially 2 or 3 tech providers that we stitch together, I guess. It serves us quite well. And that's not to say that I'm not constantly looking at, how's this space evolving? Are there better products out there? Clearly, costs of replatforming are something you need to take into consideration.
Absolutely.
So you can't take a replatform lightly. But at the same time, the world is always changing, our product is always changing, and our needs are always changing, right? And so whatever is serving us very well today won't necessarily serve us very well in 5 years' time. And so we need to be on top of it, really.
What I found exciting is the development of smaller sort of niche tech products and services that will integrate with the bigger platforms, some including platforms like Bizzabo, where for the right client and for the right audience and for the right particular type of digital event, there may be a small niche company out there that does something that integrates nice and easily, that offers a particular service. And I think that's really where, from the last sort of 18 months, 2 years, as I've seen some of the event tech services grow, it is some of those sort of smaller niche companies that are working with the bigger platforms. Any experience of that in your end of things?
Yes, I mean we are using. I want to get the name right here because, gosh, sometimes I mix them up. I think it's Grip.
Yeah.
As a networking kind of meeting platform.
Sure. Yeah.
And then there's another one we've been looking at. I guess the small players that focus on a niche are good in the sense of they're not trying to be everything to everyone. At the same time, I'm acutely aware of the event tech cycle and their funding cycle and where startups are. And so there's always the risk with some of these small players is that, one day they exist and the next day they're gone, or they can't sustain themselves, or they get bought up and swallowed by another player. And so I guess the pluses and minuses of using small ones, small providers that focus on a niche are good because they're specializing on a very small segment, but at the same time, they can have the disadvantage of, where's their funding? Are they going to exist in 6 months' time? If I build a whole user case around a particular platform and then this platform goes, what happens to my business? And so particularly my product and technology team are always acutely aware of also using too many providers, the integration costs and the cybersecurity costs of attaching yourself or making your tech stack too complex and complicated.
Yeah.
So essentially, you have essentially this axis of simplicity and complexity, and then one-stop providers and using lots of smaller providers. And I guess depending on your business model, you have to find your way somewhere on this axis, right? And so sensibly, I would say don't place yourself at the two extremes of one end. So don't put all your eggs in one basket with one provider, but at the same time, you can't have a tech stack that's got 20 providers because the complexities of it falling over and the cybersecurity risks that brings with it, and the risks of them, disappearing because of their funding cycle coming to an end or whatever. And so I guess it's a real skill, and it's something we're constantly evaluating in terms of looking at the user data, what's working, what's not working, looking at our NPS scores in terms of are people satisfied with their digital event experience, and then constantly scouting out what's out in the market, really, and doing some internal development as well, I guess. But suddenly, I've gone from being a physical event, I guess, MD CEO to a digital company CEO MD, which frankly I've loved, and I've had so much fun, and it's been an exhilarating ride. But essentially, they're different skill sets, but I think you would argue that anyone who's leading any sorts of company, if they are not digital enabled and they don't think digital first, they're essentially going to be left behind. And so this was a big wake up call to the event industry as well, I guess, right?
Indeed, and just a blatant plug. After you've listened to today's episode, if you do go back and search wherever you get this particular podcast from, be it on the Event Industry News website or on your podcast platform, if you search for some keywords like tech stack or tech platforms, you'll find loads of podcasts, particularly in the later part of 2020 and early 2021, where we spoke about the development of tech stacks, because again, that was a phrase that sprung up and people were like, well, what on earth is a tech stack? APIs, integration, there are all these, not just how to do it, but the terminology in order to be able to communicate effectively with all these providers. And if you're curious to maybe reference back sort of 2 years on from some of those conversations, do have a little search through some of the older episodes of the podcast. We've spoken a lot. Well, please go on, Orson.
Sorry, James. Also, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, and incredibly, I remember when I was working for the DMGT, there's the Euromine and the Daily Mail group, many years ago, they sent more or less everyone on an agile capital A product development training course very early on in my career, which was quite progressive for them, I think, at the time. And I remember when the pandemic hit, and I remember asking my senior leadership team here at the FT Live, how many people have heard of Agile with a capital A or being on an Agile training course, and none of them had. And suddenly I realized the scale of the challenge. Not only did we have to pivot to a digital model, but also the people and the skill set had to transition to a digital way of thinking as well, right? And so we did a whole piece of learning and development for the whole of FT Live around Agile, around thinking digital first. And we're now at a stage where, everyone does think in a digital first way, but, that transition wasn't easy. It wasn't just the technology, but it was also the mindset, the skill set amongst the whole team. But we've gone along. Yeah.
And what a period of time, when we look back between, I guess, the decade 2010 to 2020, when you look at the advancement in digital communication that we experienced in that single decade. I know that in the, from 2000 to 2010, we had email and people computers and laptops started to creep into the workplace and replace traditional paper methods. But really that decade between 2010 and 2020 in the pandemic, had we not had that explosion and that, I suppose, just gigantic leap forward in digital communication, then that the period of time between 2020 and 2021 during the pandemic, that would have been a very, very different landscape had we not had such a significant 10 years of development prior to that. And I think you already mentioned that in years to come, we will look back on that, in sort of the history of economics and in history full stop as such a significant period in our development, as humankind.
I keep telling my team, we weathered the pandemic storm, and I can't think of another type of event or cataclysmic occurrence that would mean that we're not set up to keep going even in whatever the next thing that the world throws at us, right?
Agreed.
And so we're in a really strong place now, because we all of us have now got different models, different skill sets, a lot more advanced skill sets that really places in a way that, whatever the world throws us at next, this industry is stronger, more resilient than it has ever been before, really. And it's incredible. And the technology has allowed the world to be more interconnected. And so the need to communicate / meet is never going to go away, right? And, either meeting online or meeting in person, and, we can go through the pluses and minuses and the benefits of one versus the other. But the fundamental fact remains is that the world is more interconnected now than it ever was before. And that's never going to change, really. And so for people who work in our industry, I say this is a great time to join the event industry, because we've never been needed so more, and we've never had many tools at our disposal to deploy our offering so well than we have ever before, right? And so it's a great time to be in the industry, right?
Absolutely. And if I may, I'm conscious I've got one eye on the clock, and I have every appreciation for how busy your schedule must be. But we've spoken a lot about the digital side of things and the transformation that we've had to go through. But it's really important that we also very, very quickly just look at the physical side of things and in-person events and ask whether or not the return as we experienced it in the latter part of 2021 to the ability to run in-person events drove you as a business to actually rethink how you deliver those in-person events. Was there an expectation that when they did come back that they were not necessarily bigger than ever, but certainly better than ever in terms of the quality of production, how you were delivering things, the visual aspect, the interaction aspects? How did the pandemic shape the in-person events for you when they came back?
So, I mean, by and large, physical conferences or physical events are physical events. And so the fundamental proposition didn't change throughout the pandemic. And so once we went back, essentially, convening people in a physical place at a certain time in a certain way, that hasn't changed. Having said that, there's a lot more competition for people's time. And so people will only, choose the events where they can really get an ROI. And so while there was this big kind of rush to meet in person, I also feel, and I've seen that, people are a lot more pickier with how they use their time, right? I mean, you only need to think about, how difficult it is to get people to meet you for a business lunch. The reality is now a lot of people are working from home. They only come into town 2 or 3 days a week. They're really time poor because essentially the merging of, your personal life and your business life has become a lot stronger since the pandemic, and that's been good by and large, but it means that you're a lot more time poor than you were before, right? And so people will only pick the events where there's a kind of obvious ROI, and so that means not only an amazing experience on site, and so things like, I don't know, digital backdrops and making sure that the events look incredible. Expectations have gone up a lot, right? And that's a lot of fun, although it comes with a cost. And essentially, I can't imagine in-person events now without a digital backdrop. In the next 12 to 24 months, I can't imagine any event from a reputable brand that'll be able to run an in-person conference with an old-fashioned backdrop and a projector, right? So
yeah, no, absolutely, I agree with that.
That's been fun, but it comes with a cost. But the costs of that are coming down thanks to China in a way. But then so obviously the on-site experience has to be great, but that was always the case. But obviously using the latest technology to make it even more kind of wow. But then we're back to the ROI on the day. What am I leaving my house today to get to a 5-star venue in central London to go to a conference? Unless the content is amazing, but the people I'm meeting and the time that I'm using while I'm there is unbelievably productive, then this is a bit of a waste of time. And so we're back to facilitating business meetings and making sure that people's time and effort is not devoted to just listening content, but in terms of the amount of people they meet and the quality of people they meet and the quality of those interactions has become more. I mean, it was always very important, but more important than ever, because if I'm just going to listen to the content, well, I know that I can listen to the content from home, especially since FT Live, 100% of FT Live's events are all broadcast digitally, and we've made a conscious decision not to roll back on that. And so unless the in-person experience provides me with a higher ROI than the digital experience, well, then this is a waste of time for me to leave home and go meeting people face to face. And so we're spending a lot more time and effort in terms of facilitating those meetings. Sorry, Brella is the other piece of technology.
Of course, yes.
Sorry.
Brella.
Mixing up Grip and Brella, we use both. But Brella is, just to be fair, not that I'm making advertising any one product, but I just want to be fair. And so we are investing a lot more in making sure that people's times at the physical events are a lot more productive than they were before, because otherwise they might as well watch it from home, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That was always the argument pre-pandemic. When we mentioned webinars, but when we were having the discussion pre-pandemic about live streaming events, oh no, we don't want to live stream our in-person event because we're worried that if people can watch it on YouTube, they're not going to turn up to the in-person event. That argument or that particular point of view, I think, has been well and truly cast asunder. Since the pandemic, I think.
I still get it every now and then from the team, and I'm always amazed, really. But the people watching from home, by and large, tend to be different people, and so the people that are going to watch it from home, and there's also different price points and access points, are actually different from the people who come on site to do meetings. But also, people watching from home, this is an incredible marketing tool, not only for our sponsors who love the digital activation, by the way, because it's giving them a lot more exposure to bigger audiences all over the world, but it also provides a huge marketing funnel for, we just talked about our subscription, but in future years for our events. And so people who watch our events digitally are more likely to buy an in-person pass in the future than people who don't, right? And
absolutely. And when we talk about data, again, something we've spoken about today, when you look at pre-reg and registration statistics historically in the events industry, we can now correlate pre-reg data and people who didn't turn up to the in-person event, but then subsequently did log into a digital offering or some sort of online version of the event. And, how many of those people had every intention of turning up, but for whatever reason, personal, business, or otherwise, weren't able to attend. Therefore, they were afforded the opportunity to at least log in digitally. You've potentially not shunned somebody from coming or prevented somebody from coming by for it online, you've actually given them the opportunity to still attend when they may not have done. And the beauty about the digital data is now is that we can draw those conclusions where maybe pre-pandemic, when we were still talking about just live streaming an event, we couldn't draw those same conclusions because the data wasn't linked in the way that it is now with our various registration platforms and online delivery platforms.
And the other thing that the digital event or broadcast allows you, and this is something that we're also investing in quite strongly, is the whole VOD experience. And artificial intelligence now is really coming into its own with this. And so we're looking at solutions where essentially post-event you can search for a word and it'll bring you straight to that piece of, and it could be a 2-day conference with hundreds of hours of content. And say, for example, the FT's Global Banking Conference, which is a 3-day event with hundreds of speakers. Well, in the not too distant future, you're going to be able, post-event, to log into our VOD solution and search for, interest rate rises, for example. And the technology, in a matter of seconds, will bring you to the points within the hundreds of hours of content where interest rate rises have been mentioned, right? And this is a pretty valuable source of content. Again, different user case, probably different people who wouldn't have necessarily come to a live event, but who need to figure out, for example, what's happening in the world of banking, and they need to figure it out quite quickly. And this will allow them, artificial intelligence and new technologies, which are coming in kind of thick and fast, will allow them to access content in a kind of very productive way. I mean, there's one thing allowing somebody to have VOD access to hundreds of hours of content, but who's going to sit and watch hundreds of hours of content? And there's another user case if I'm allowing people to watch hundreds of hours of content, but also to search for the content that they're looking for. And this is kind of really, really exciting, right?
And I know that there's at least one platform that we've actually spoken to on this podcast before that will take your video, run it through in a matter of seconds, and actually bookmark and digitally encode keywords. So it will take you in an hour and a half keynote session. It will just take you to the specific 30 seconds where that keynote speaker referenced that particular topic that you're searching for, without the need to scroll through the whole video. And as you said, this is all AI, development where it really comes into its own in terms of streamlining the way we access that content afterwards and making it a little bit more effective.
And it just provides a lot more value to the user, right? And suddenly you've got the in-person event value, the post-event value, and it just makes our users a lot more stickier and want them, provides them more value, and so with a higher propensity to come back and buy again or attend events again, right?
Absolutely. I'm really conscious of time today because, we usually keep these to sort of 25, 30 minutes, but it's been such a fascinating conversation today that I was keen to make sure that we afforded Orson the luxury of a little bit extra time. And I'm really grateful for the time that you have given today, Orson. Our guest today has been Orson Francescone, who's the Managing Director of FT Live. If you would like to look into a little bit more about what they're up to and what they are as a business, as I've referenced the website on several occasions during today's podcast, live.ft.com is the website to go to, and you can look at all of the events that they're running, filter them by month, and you'll see in practice some of the things that we've discussed today in terms of the mixture of digital, in-person and digital, and just in-person events, and the blend of events that are being run in there. Orson, thanks very much for your time. Is there anything else that we need to... Oh, go on.
If anyone's got any questions or needs any advice, you can get me on LinkedIn. I always reply to LinkedIn messages, and so happy to share kind of thoughts, advice on events model or anything that you've heard today and you want a bit more news or clarification. I'm always happy to share. So you can find me on LinkedIn.
Fabulous. And it's been a pleasure to speak to you today. And just one final word, just for our own publication. If you're listening to this today on your podcast platform, thank you very much for tuning in. As always, please do make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast as well on your podcast platform. Please do head over when you get a minute to eventindustrynews.com. You can see the latest news features, special supplements relating to into the various verticals and different sectors of the events industry. And of course, the A to Z supplier directory. If you work in the industry and you're looking for a supplier, a service, a contract, a particular type of event technology, there's a good chance that you will find it within the A to Z supplier directory on eventindustrynews.com. Of course, if you are already on the website and you're watching this or listening to this today while you're working, thank you very much for tuning in. And please do go in the opposite direction to wherever you may get your audio podcasts from, and make sure that you are subscribed to the Event Industry News podcast.
Maybe see you in Vegas next year.
I will be in Vegas. I'm on the production team for Event Tech Live.
You know, my first ever event was in Las Vegas, so I'm hoping.
I had the pleasure of it last year. That's a whole podcast series in itself.
Yeah,
is learning how to work in the US event space. Yeah. So yeah, we'll see you in November for Event Tech Live in London, of course, everybody,
yes.
And then in April next year for the second edition of Event Tech Live over in Las Vegas as well. Thanks very much again to Orson Francescone for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next edition of the podcast. Thanks, everybody.